Minnesota, January 1946. Sergeant Michael Jensen stood in the Camp McCoy administrative office holding paperwork that could end his military career. Across from him sat Anna Bergman, a German POW scheduled for repatriation to occupy Germany. Her sister, a naturalized American citizen, lived 40 miles away in Madison, Wisconsin, but military regulations prohibited direct family reunification during the POW repatriation process. Jensen had told Anna 3 days earlier, "I'm taking you home, not to Germany, to your sister." When the War Department received his official request for humanitarian sponsorship, they launched an investigation that would determine whether compassion or regulations prevailed. Anna Bergman was 32, a former secretary from Munich who had been conscripted into auxiliary services in 1943. She worked in a supply depot outside Hamburg, processing paperwork and inventory, until British forces captured her position in April 1945. She was classified as civilian auxiliary, not quite military, but affiliated enough to be. Detained as a prisoner of war, she had a sister. That fact defined everything that followed. Marguerite had emigrated to America in 1936, married a German-American engineer named Robert Fisher, settled in Madison, Wisconsin, and become a naturalized citizen in 1940. When war began, she found herself trapped between identities: American by citizenship and choice, German by birth and family ties. The sisters had corresponded until 1942, when international mail became impossible. Marguerite spent 4 years not knowing if Anna was alive, writing letters that were never sent, hoping for news that never came. When the Red Cross began facilitating POW family contact in late 1945, Marguerite submitted a request to locate her sister. The response came in November. Anna Bergman, detained at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, alive, healthy, scheduled for repatriation to Germany in February 1946, 40 miles away. Her sister was 40 miles away, detained as an enemy prisoner, while Marguerite lived as an American citizen. The proximity was almost cruel. Marguerite went to Camp McCoy in December, filled out visitor request forms, submitted proof of relationship, underwent background checks. The process took 3 weeks. Finally, on December 28th, she was permitted a 2-hour supervised visit with her sister. They met in the administrative office, a WAC officer present to supervise, both women uncertain how to bridge 9 years of separation compressed into 2 hours under observation. Marguerite spoke first. "You're alive. I thought ... I didn't know." "I'm alive," Anna confirmed in German-accented English. A prisoner, but alive. They spent the 2 hours catching up in compressed summaries. Anna described the war years' work, privation, capture, transport to America. Marguerite described her life in Madison marriage, work, citizenship, the strange experience of being German in America during war. When time expired, Marguerite asked the supervising officer, "Can she come home with me? She's my sister. I'm an American citizen. Can't I sponsor her release?" The officer explained gently, "She's classified as a POW. Regulations require repatriation to Germany after formal surrender and processing. Family reunification through immigration channels would need to wait until after she returns to Germany and applies for visa." "But that could take years," Marguerite protested. "And she has no home to return to. Hamburg was destroyed. Our family is gone. Her home is with me now." "I understand," the officer said. "But those are the regulations." Sergeant Michael Jensen was 38, a dairy farmer from rural Minnesota who had been drafted in 1942. He served as administrative personnel at Camp McCoy, processing paperwork, managing records, facilitating the bureaucracy that kept prisoner facilities functioning. He had been present during Marguerite's visit, had overheard the conversation, had watched two sisters reunite, only to face forced separation by regulations that seemed designed to prioritize procedure over humanity. After Marguerite left, Jensen reviewed Anna's file. Classification: civilian auxiliary. Security risk: low. Skills: clerical. Family: sister in Madison, Wisconsin, naturalized citizen. Repatriation destination: Hamburg, Germany, destroyed. Prospects: minimal. The file was one among thousands. But Jensen couldn't stop thinking about it. About two sisters separated by war and regulations. About a woman being sent back to ruins when family waited 40 miles away. About whether following rules was always the right thing when rules created unnecessary suffering. He made a decision that would risk his career. He would find a legal way to reunite the sisters. Jensen spent evenings in the camp law library, reading regulations about POW repatriation, immigration law, family reunification policies. The framework was complex, designed to handle millions of displaced persons in POWs, while maintaining security and processing efficiency. Most regulations were clear. POWs returned to country of origin after formal surrender and processing. Exceptions existed for specific circumstances: intelligence cooperation, medical necessity, special skills needed for reconstruction. But nothing explicitly covered family reunification when family members were already in the United States. Jensen found a potential loophole in humanitarian sponsorship provisions. American citizens could sponsor displaced persons for immigration if they could prove: 1. Family relationship. 2. Financial support capability. 3. No security concerns with the displaced person. 4. Compelling humanitarian circumstances. The provisions were designed for post-repatriation immigration, not for preventing repatriation entirely. But the language was ambiguous enough that Jensen thought he could make a case. He needed to build documentation. He needed Marguerite's cooperation. And he needed approval from superiors, who would probably reject the request, but might possibly see merit in humanitarian exception. Jensen called Marguerite in early January, explained what he'd found, outlined a plan. Marguerite would formally sponsor Anna for immigration under humanitarian provisions. Jensen would prepare the paperwork arguing that forcing Anna to return to Germany only to apply for immigration later created unnecessary hardship when family sponsorship was available immediately. "Will this work?" Marguerite asked. "Honestly," Jensen replied, "probably not. The regulations weren't designed for this. But sometimes the right thing is worth attempting, even when success is unlikely. What happens if it fails? Anna gets repatriated as scheduled in February. You apply for her immigration through normal channels. It takes years, but eventually works. The difference is whether we try to prevent unnecessary separation or accept it as inevitable." Marguerite didn't hesitate. "I'll do whatever you need. Tell me what documents to provide." Jensen spent 2 weeks assembling the most comprehensive humanitarian sponsorship package ever submitted from Camp McCoy. He included Anna's complete service record showing her role as civilian auxiliary with no combat involvement, security assessment confirming she posed no threat, Marguerite's citizenship papers, financial records, proof of stable housing, letters from Marguerite's employer, neighbors, church attesting to her character, photographs of destroyed Hamburg showing Anna had no home to return to. He wrote a cover memo explaining the situation, acknowledging this was unconventional, arguing that regulations should serve humanitarian goals rather than obstruct them when circumstances warranted exception. On January 15, 1946, he submitted the package through proper channels to the War Department's POW Affairs Division in Washington. Then he told Anna what he'd done. Jensen found Anna in the camp library, where she often spent recreation hours. He sat down across from her, spoke quietly so others wouldn't overhear. "I submitted paperwork to the War Department," he said, "requesting humanitarian exception to your repatriation. asking that you be released directly to your sister's custody rather than sent back to Germany. Anna stared at him. Why would you do this? Because it's the right thing, Jensen said simply. Your sister is 40 miles away. You have no home in Germany. The regulations are designed for general cases, not for specific circumstances like yours. Someone needs to ask for exception. I'm asking, but if they say no, you will have caused trouble for yourself. For trying to help me. Possibly, Jensen agreed. But I'm a dairy farmer from Minnesota who got drafted. Worst case, I get reprimanded and go back to farming when I'm discharged. I can live with that. Anna felt tears burning her eyes. You said you submitted paperwork. What did you tell them? What reason? I told them the truth, Jensen said. That forcing you back to Germany, only to apply for immigration years later, creates unnecessary hardship when immediate family reunification is possible. That your sister is an American citizen willing and able to sponsor you. That you pose no security risk. That humanitarian circumstances warrant exception to standard procedure. And if they approve? Then I'm taking you home, Jensen said. Not to Germany. Home. To your sister. To Wisconsin. To the life you should have had 9 years ago when war interrupted it. Weeks passed with no response. Anna continued her routine at Camp McCoy work detail in the laundry, meals in the mess hall, recreation hours, the structured boredom of captivity. But now she carried impossible hope alongside the resignation she'd learned to maintain. Marguerite called Jensen weekly, asking for updates. He had none. The War Department moved slowly, processing thousands of cases, dealing with complexities of post-war demobilization and repatriation. Other prisoners noticed Anna's distraction. She told a few about the situation, the sister in Madison, the sergeant's intervention, the waiting for impossible approval. Some prisoners were supportive. Others thought she was being naive, that bureaucracies didn't grant exceptions, that hope was more painful than acceptance. One woman, Helga, said bluntly, "They'll say no. They always say no. You should prepare yourself." Maybe, Anna replied. But Sergeant Jensen thought it was worth trying. I have to honor that by hoping. February 1st was Anna's scheduled repatriation date. As the date approached with no word from Washington, Jensen prepared contingency plans. If the answer was no, he wanted to ensure Anna's actual repatriation went as smoothly as possible. If the answer was yes, he needed to process her release properly. On January 28th, 1 week before scheduled repatriation, a telegram arrived from the War Department as POW Affairs Division. Case number 462891 under review, stop hold. Repatriation pending, decision stop. Jensen called Marguerite immediately. They're reviewing it. They haven't said yes, but they haven't said no either. And they've delayed her repatriation, which means they're seriously considering it. How long until they decide? Marguerite asked. No idea, Jensen admitted. Could be days, could be weeks. But the fact that they're reviewing, rather than automatically denying, is positive. He told Anna that evening. She absorbed the news with careful composure, not allowing herself to fully hope, but unable to completely suppress it either. The War Department's review was more thorough than Jensen had anticipated. Investigators contacted Marguerite, verified her finances and housing situation, interviewed neighbors and employers. They reviewed Anna's complete service record, interviewed other prisoners who had known her, checked with British authorities, who had originally processed her capture. The investigation wasn't hostile, it was methodical. They were building a case file, documenting everything, ensuring that if they granted exception, it would be defensible if questioned. Jensen received a call from a Major Thomas Harrison in Washington. Harrison explained, "Your request is unusual, but not unprecedented. We've granted humanitarian exceptions before, though rarely during the POW repatriation process itself. I need to ask you directly, is there any impropriety in this case?" Any relationship between you and the prisoner beyond professional? No, sir, Jensen said firmly. I met her sister during a family visit. I reviewed the case file. I recognized that forcing this woman back to Germany when immediate family reunification was possible seemed unnecessarily cruel when alternatives existed. That's the extent of my involvement. And you're willing to stand by this request despite potential professional consequences? Yes, sir, because it's the right thing to do. Harrison was quiet for a moment. Then, Sergeant, I appreciate your conviction. We're completing our review. You'll have a decision within 10 days. The decision arrived on February 12, 1946. A telegram to Camp McCoy. Attention Sergeant Michael Jensen. Case number 462891. Approved stop prisoner Anna Bergman, released to custody of sponsor. Marguerite Fisher stop humanitarian exception. Granted pursuant to Section 12, Clause 4, stop process release immediately stop Jensen. Read the telegram 3 times, certain he was misunderstanding. Then he walked to the camp commander's office and showed the telegram to Colonel William Morrison. Morrison read it, then looked at Jensen. I actually approved it. Yes, sir. Do you understand what this means, Sergeant? You challenged standard procedure, argued for humanitarian exception, and the War Department agreed with you. That's unprecedented. I just wanted to help 2 sisters reunite, sir. Morrison smiled. Well, you did. Process her release. And, Sergeant, this goes in your service record as exemplary initiative and humanitarian leadership. You should be proud. Jensen found Anna in the mess hall during lunch. He sat down beside her, spoke quietly. They approved it. You're being released to your sister's custody. Today. Anna's fork clattered to her tray. Today? Right now, actually. Pack your belongings. Your sister is on her way. I told her this morning. Anna started crying, unable to speak. Around them, other prisoners noticed, began asking what was happening. When they learned, the table erupted in quiet celebration, women hugging Anna, congratulating her, some crying themselves at witnessing impossible bureaucracy yielding to compassion. 2 hours later, Marguerite arrived at Camp McCoy. She and Anna were reunited in the administrative office, this time without time limits, without supervision, without the looming separation of repatriation. Jensen handled the paperwork, release forms, custody transfer, immigration documentation. When everything was complete, he walked the sisters to Marguerite's car. You told me you were taking me home. Anna said in English she'd been practicing. You kept your promise. Wasn't just me, Jensen replied. Your sister fought for you. The War Department recognized special circumstances. Lots of people made this possible. But you started it, Marguerite said. You saw 2 sisters who needed each other and decided regulations shouldn't prevent reunion. Thank you doesn't seem adequate. It's adequate, Jensen assured her. Seeing you 2 together is adequate. Drive safely. He watched them drive away, Anna looking back through the rear window, waving until the car disappeared around the bend toward Madison. News of the humanitarian exception spread through military administrative channels. Some officers praised Jensen's initiative. Others felt he'd set dangerous precedent, that exceptions to repatriation protocol could create chaos. The War Department issued a memo clarifying that humanitarian exceptions would be considered case by case, that Anna's situation represented unique circumstances, that this was not blanket policy change. But they acknowledged that when regulations created unnecessary hardship and viable alternatives existed, exceptions could be warranted. Jensen received 3 more requests from Camp McCoy prisoners with family connections in America. He reviewed each case, helped prepare documentation for 2 that met criteria. Both were eventually denied. Their circumstances differed enough from Anna's that exception wasn't warranted. The 3rd case was approved 6 months later, setting additional precedent that humanitarian consideration wasn't one-time anomaly, but available tool when truly warranted. Anna moved into Marguerite's house in Madison. The adjustment was strange going, from prisoner to free civilian overnight, from institutional routine to independent life, from enemy alien to legal immigrant, in process of becoming American. She found work as a secretary, using skills from her Munich days. Applied for permanent residency, then citizenship. Attended English classes, participated in the German-American community that welcomed her cautiously at first and warmly as her story became known. She wrote to Jensen periodically, updating him on her progress. In 1947, I am working for a law firm now, processing immigration paperwork for others. I see how difficult the system is and appreciate even more what you did. In 1949, I received my citizenship today. When they asked where I wanted to call home, I said Wisconsin. That's where my sister is. That's where my life restarted. Thank you for making that possible. In 1952, my sister and I talk often about those months when I was 40 miles away, but might as well have been on the moon. About how you refused to accept that proximity meant nothing if regulations prevented reunion. You taught us both that sometimes the right thing requires challenging systems, not just accepting them. Jensen was discharged in June 1946, returned to Minnesota, resumed dairy farming. He rarely spoke about the war, considered his service unremarkable, except for one case where he managed to help two sisters when regulations almost prevented it. In 1951, he received a letter from the War Department recognizing his exceptional humanitarian service and administrative innovation in the Bergman case. The letter noted that his approach had influenced policy discussions about handling displaced persons with family connections in America. Jensen framed the letter, hung it in his barn where no one but him would see it. Not from modesty, but from perspective. He had helped one person at a time when millions needed help. That it mattered to Anna and Marguerite was sufficient. Official recognition was unnecessary bonus. Anna and Marguerite lived within blocks of each other in Madison for 40 years. They raised families. Anna married an electrician in 1948, had 2 children. They worked, participated in community life, and remained close in a way that war's interruption had threatened to make impossible. They spoke German together, privately, English publicly. They observed German traditions at home, American traditions in community. They negotiated the bicultural identity that defined German Americans in post-war period proud of heritage, committed to adopted country, working to prove that German ethnicity didn't mean German nationalism. In 1985, a historian researching POW family reunification stories interviewed them together. Asked what Jensen's intervention had meant. He gave us back 9 years, Marguerite said. The years war stole. We couldn't recover them, but we could start rebuilding from where we were, rather than spending additional years separated by bureaucracy. He taught me that even in systems that seem rigid, humanity can find space, Anna added. That one person seeing injustice and deciding to address it can matter more than all the regulations that create injustice. The Bergman case remained relatively obscure, a footnote in administrative histories of POW repatriation. But it set precedent that humanitarian exceptions were possible when circumstances warranted and proper documentation supported them. Between 1946 and 1948, approximately 30 similar cases were approved using the Bergman case as template. Not many in the context of hundreds of thousands of POWs repatriated, but significant for those 30 individuals and their families who were spared years of unnecessary separation. The cases shared common elements: family already in America, destroyed homes in Germany, low security risk, solid sponsorship. Each built on precedent the Bergman case established, creating slowly accumulating evidence that regulations could serve humanity rather than obstruct it. In a 1978 interview with a local Minnesota newspaper doing a story on World War II veterans, Jensen explained his philosophy. I was a farmer who got drafted. I processed paperwork for 3 years. Most of it was routine. But once, I saw a case where the rules were going to separate two sisters for no good reason, except that's how things were always done. I thought, maybe there's a better way. So I tried to find it. The newspaper article was brief, buried in the local section, but it captured something essential about individual agency within systems. That one person questioning whether things had to be a certain way could sometimes change outcomes for people who had no power to change them themselves. Anna died in 1995 at 81. Her obituary in the Madison newspaper mentioned her work, her family, and briefly, German immigrant who came to America as POW after World War II, reunited with sister through humanitarian exception to military regulations, became citizen 1949. At her funeral, her daughter read from letters Anna had saved correspondence with Jensen, spanning nearly 50 years. The letters documented not just gratitude, but shared philosophy, that systems should serve people, that regulations should bend when rigidity created unnecessary suffering, that one person's willingness to challenge procedures could matter enormously. The last letter, written by Jensen months before his own death in 1994, said simply, "I've been thinking about that day I told you I was taking you home. I meant it literally to your sister, to Madison. But I've realized it meant something larger, taking you home to possibility, to future, to the life you should have had. Thank you for reminding me, all these years, why that mattered." The story of Anna Bergman and Michael Jensen matters not because it changed military policy comprehensively or affected thousands of people. It matters because it demonstrates what's possible when individuals choose compassion over compliance, when they look at regulations and ask whether those rules serve their intended purpose. Jensen saw two sisters 40 miles apart, separated by bureaucracy that prioritized procedure over humanitarian concern. He spent weeks researching loopholes, building documentation, arguing for exception. He risked his career not for personal gain, but because he believed the right thing was worth attempting even when success seemed unlikely. The War Department, to their credit, reviewed his case fairly and granted exception. They set precedent that humanitarian considerations could outweigh standard procedure when circumstances warranted. They chose to be an institution that could adapt rather than an institution that rigidly enforced rules regardless of outcome. And Anna and Marguerite got 40 years together that regulations almost prevented. They raised families. They built lives. They demonstrated that integration and understanding were possible even for people who had been enemies during war. In a car leaving Camp McCoy in February 1946, Anna Bergman looked back at the sergeant who had told her, "I'm taking you home," and made that promise real despite regulations designed to prevent exactly what he'd accomplished. That moment a promise kept, a family reunited, a system bent toward humanity endures, as a reminder that even in institutional contexts designed to prioritize efficiency over individual circumstances, compassion can find space when individuals choose to create it. Jensen took Anna home, not just to Wisconsin, but to the possibility that even wartime enemies could build lives together when given chance. That regulations could serve humanity rather than obstruct it. That one person questioning, "Why must it be this way?" could change everything for someone with no power to change anything themselves. That's the legacy. Not grand policy reform or thousands of lives affected. Just one sergeant, one prisoner, one sister, and the choice to make, "I'm taking you home," means something more than just following orders or accepting that separation was inevitable because regulations said so. Sometimes the most important victories are the smallest ones. And sometimes taking someone home means something far larger than geography. It means refusing to accept unnecessary suffering when alternatives exist, even when those alternatives require challenging systems that seem unchangeable.